Not long ago, we told you the story of Sir Robert Borden, one of Canada's most successful but least well-known prime ministers. Here's another.
On this beach, officers and men of the Royal Regiment of Canada died at dawn, 19th of August, 1942, striving to reach the heights beyond. You who are alive on this beach, remember that these men died far from home, that others here and everywhere might freely enjoy life in God's mercy.
William Lyon MacKenzie King, considerably more famous. But what do we really know about him? We know he had a reputation for being eccentric, quirky, even as he led the country through the Great Depression and World War II. That's just a summary. There's much more to the man responsible for Canada's welfare state. Historian Adler Allan Levine, author of King, joins us here in Winnipeg. Welcome, Alan.
Thank you.
Before we get into William Lyon MacKenzie, do you get the impression that most Canadians know very, very little about their own history?
I think that's true. I think that like someone like Mackenzie King, there hasn't been a book written about him, or an accessible book, let's say, a popular book, for more than 3 decades. And poll after poll shows that what they know about King, that he talked to his dog, he loved his mother, the kind of salacious details from his diary that people wrote about some time ago. That's probably what he's best remembered for. He's sort of this chubby face on the $50 bill, and people have forgotten that he's probably the most dominating personality for the first half of the 20th century in Canada.
Is there anybody in the picture right now that you could compare this man to?
Mackenzie King, probably not. He had the advantage of governing at a time when people in Quebec, for example, voted federally for one of the traditional parties, and King, there was no nationalist party to vote for per se. King was very clever. He understood more than anybody else of that period that extremism does not work in Canada. So he hugged that middle of the political spectrum, and he was guaranteed, for example, something like 90% of Quebec's 65 seats that they had in those days, almost every single time he had an election, because the Conservative Party of its day, led by Arthur Meehan, later by R.B. Bennett and other people, always tended to be pretty stubborn and firm in some of their policies. And that just worked to King's advantage. So even in the election in 1930, for example, the only one that King lost, he still won 40 seats in Quebec out of the 65, which was seen as a pretty big deal in those days. And then he also played to the West, whereas the Conservatives had economic policies that weren't popular. King moderated sufficiently and was guaranteed there. So the elections in those days really came down to Ontario, and King was always successful enough. So he was a very... His reputation for being a political strategist and understanding politics has been overshadowed by his weirdness and the interest in spiritualism and so forth.
All right. Was it the spiritualism and the other stuff, the business about the dog and the mother?
Yes.
Is that what got you interested, or was it his politics?
Two things. I thought that he deserved a book that people could read about him. I was talking to some friends of mine, actually, going back to your first question, and they really knew little about him, and these are all well-read people. And they just didn't have any understanding. And I always looked at the American book scene, and there's always these interesting books coming out of American presidents. And there have been a few about Canadian prime ministers, but King, I thought, was missing. So that was one thing. Plus, it's interesting. He's described as being sort of a dull politician, and to a certain extent, I do agree with that in the book. And in that he was not what you call charismatic. He certainly wasn't a television prime minister. Would never have survived in this day and age. And yet his diary, which is really the heart of the book and why he's so interesting, shows this very complicated man, complex, and the diary is really where he comes alive, and it's how I presented him. So it's rare that a biographer can get access to the mind of your subject in such an in-depth way on essentially a day-to-day basis. I mean, I could tell you how he felt almost at any moment of any time in his life. I mean, that's amazing.
If he had gone public with what he went private on in the diary, if he made the private public, could he have been reelected?
Probably not. No, he would be shocked if he even knew we were sitting and talking about this diary. I mean, he left some rather ambiguous instructions about the diary. So the diary is like 30,000 pages, 7.5 million words. Someone, Robert Fulford, a journalist, said that 500 years from now, the only thing, any Canadian historical document that will be still read is Mackenzie King's diary. So he wanted it preserved, but just those parts that would contribute to the telling of his political story. His literary executors, for whatever reason, decided not to destroy it. And because of that, we know everything about him. And he was a very insecure individual. He cataloged almost every comment, every slight that someone sent his way, and remembered it for a long time. So I think it's interesting. I mean, in the cabinet room, he was surrounded by some very powerful, brilliant people, Ralston and James Ilsley, among others, and C.D. Howe. And he was somehow able to, I guess, control some of that insecurity. But as soon as he got home, he would write about how he felt, and it didn't always, wasn't always the same.
What was the strangest? I mean, if you tried to forget everything that you've ever researched, what's the one thing that you couldn't forget even if you tried?
Shaving cream lather. He was fascinated by the images in his shaving cream lather. I mean, people read tea leaves. He was a tea leaf reader as well. The spiritualism papers were only released to the public 10 years ago. So I spent a lot of time. Those were files. It's amazing to me that those actually weren't destroyed. They were letters and all sorts of notes on séances and so forth. And he has all this stuff. He was fascinated by images and tea leaves and shaving cream lather that I only could shake my head at. I mean, some of the time when I was doing my research, I just, you can't make this stuff up. Like, where is this guy coming from?
Did he have conversations with the dead?
Oh, yes, all the time.
Which ones? I mean, who are the stars?
His mother, of course, who was very popular in the diary. Laurier, his mentor. He also talked to all sorts of historical figures from the Bible. On his birthday, he would sit down at this little table where they would have this table wrapping, and there would be troops of historical figures would come to wish him happy birthday.
Alan, we've got to wrap right here. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate the story. William Lyon Mackenzie King, A Life Guided by the Hand of Destiny. King is the name of the book by Allan Levine.